What happens to a man when he stops chasing pleasure and begins to transmute it?
Most will never know, because most are chained, enslaved by impulses governed by desires they do not understand. But in this video, you will discover the truth that has been hidden from you since you were born. The desexualized mind is the secret weapon of the most powerful men in history. We will explore how Carl Jung saw sex not as liberation but as imprisonment, and how you can transform your sexual energy, the most powerful force within you, into relentless focus, absolute self-control, and an aura that commands respect. You will understand what sexual transmutation is, how to master your impulses, and why men who rise above desire are feared, respected, and followed. But beware. If you are weak, this video will break you. If you are strong, it will set you free. If topics like psychology, philosophy, and the darkness of the human soul interest you, subscribe to the channel now. What we call pleasure, deep down, is a golden cell. The modern man lives convinced that he is free because he can satisfy his desires whenever he wants. But what he does not realize is that precisely because he is constantly satisfying himself, he becomes incapable of mastering himself. Immediate pleasure, whether through sex, pornography, social media, or female validation, acts like a sedative for the soul. It intoxicates the male spirit, weakens his will, and disconnects him from his inner mission. The mind, dulled by the addiction to pleasure, loses the capacity to concentrate, to sacrifice, to create. Carl Jung said that everything that is not brought to consciousness returns as destiny. And unconscious pleasure becomes exactly that, destiny. The man who never questions his impulses becomes their slave. He lives eternally chasing sensations, women, stimuli. But he never finds peace, because his nervous system is conditioned to easy dopamine, external recognition, orgasm without love. And when all that fails, as it inevitably fails, he feels empty, weak, anxious, desperate. He was programmed to desire, but never to conquer himself. This is the silent tragedy of the modern man. He believes he is in control when in fact he is manipulated by internal forces he never understood. We live in a society that turns sex into merchandise and male sexuality into distraction. The constant visual appeal, free pornography, the objectification of intimacy, all this bombards the male unconscious and imprisons his vital energy in the repetition of compulsive patterns. This man cannot focus, cannot create, cannot lead, because his mind is colonized, and his body, exhausted by years of energetic waste, becomes a shell. The prison of pleasure is not made of bars, but of habits. It disguises itself as freedom, as modernity, as self-knowledge. But what it really produces is a fragmented man. A man who runs from pain, avoids silence, fears solitude, and therefore never dives within himself. He fears the emptiness he feels when he is away from pleasure. But what he does not realize is that this emptiness is the doorway to his transformation. The problem is that he fills this gap with distractions instead of courage. The mind imprisoned by pleasure is a weak, impulsive, governable mind. That is exactly what the great systems of power want. Sleeping men, predictable men, men who give up their inner strength in exchange for a moment of satisfaction. But the moment a man decides to contain this impulse, the second he transforms this hunger into focus, he begins to become dangerous. The desexualized mind is not a dead mind. On the contrary, it is alive, burning, like an inner furnace that does not go out but burns silently in another direction. Desexualization is not the castration of desire, but its metamorphosis. What was once blind hunger for flesh is now thirst for transcendence. Carl Jung saw this energy as a deep archetype, the impulse for union, the longing for wholeness. And this impulse, when misdirected, gets lost in the dark alleys of lust. But when redirected, it becomes the most powerful creative essence of man. It is the fire that silently sculpts empires, the same fire that destroys entire civilizations when poorly controlled. Most men believe that desexualizing means becoming apathetic, cold, or indifferent to beauty and pleasure. But that is a childish interpretation. True desexualization is the awakening of consciousness about the source of desire. It is understanding that the attraction we feel does not come from the other person but from within us, from something that cries out for completeness. Through this understanding, the man stops being a starving dog chasing crumbs of affection and pleasure and becomes a psychic alchemist, someone who sublimates impulse and transforms it into vision, presence, authority. He stops being driven and starts to drive. Redirecting is not repressing. Jung warned us, what is repressed in the unconscious does not disappear. It only returns disguised, sabotaging from within. That is why the modern man, trying to silence his desires by force, becomes weaker, more unstable, more dependent. He lives in a war against himself. But the man who redirects transcends. He feels desire arising but does not waste it. He observes it, contains it, molds it, and sends it where few dare to look. Inside his art, his mission, his construction. He makes sex a hidden, invisible, yet overwhelming fuel. True desexualization begins when the man stops reacting and starts choosing. When he sees a woman and does not mentally kneel. When he feels the impulse and smiles because he knows the power is with him, not the desire. He does not run from the world but faces it with deeper eyes. His formerly scattered energy now pulses in his voice, his eyes, his posture. He is no longer a man moved by promises of pleasure, but by a silent force few understand. This is the essence of the internal warrior, the man who redirects his energy and becomes a temple of strength. Redirecting is a rebellion against invisible slavery. When you understand this, you realize that abstinence alone is not power, but conscious transmutation is. You are not weak for feeling desire. You are weak when desire governs you. But when you hold this force in your hands and offer it to your mission, you become something this world fears. A man who needs no approval, no pleasure, no distraction. A man who burned his weaknesses to ignite his own light. In the modern world, noise has become a symbol of affirmation. Social media, excess, displayed bodies, blatant desires. All this shouts but shouts emptiness. And the man who masters his sexual energy begins to discover a new kind of language. Silence. Not the silence of omission, weakness, or shame, but the silence of control. The silence that commands respect without saying a word. Jung saw the unconscious as something that communicates by symbols, not by screams. Likewise, the man who transmuted his energy does not need to prove anything. He enters a place, and his presence already says everything. His gaze is firm, his posture rooted. His spirit does not need noise because it already overflows power. This silence is the fruit of an internal battle won. When the man overcomes the desire for constant sexual gratification, he calms his mind. And a calm mind is a lethal mind. The world expects the man to react to stimuli, to be predictable, impulsive, manipulable. But the one who silences his primitive instincts builds a mystery around himself. He does not reveal himself entirely, does not spill, does not beg for attention. And this enigma attracts more than any appearance, because in his silence there is a secret. And the secret, as ancient initiates taught, has always been the gateway to power. The man who does not live according to his sexual desires develops a kind of invisible magnetism. He does not need to conquer, he attracts, because he has become a rarity. In a world where everyone is thirsty for validation, he is satisfied in himself. In a world where everyone shouts for pleasure, he hears only his own conscience. This creates tension, an aura, a feeling that he knows something no one else knows. Women notice him. Men respect or fear him because he has become a force. And this force comes from the inner silence of one who no longer needs the world to feel complete. But it must be understood, this silence is not empty. It is charged with intention. Every sexual impulse that has been tamed becomes spiritual fuel, and this is felt. You may be sitting in silence without saying a word, but inside you there is fire, focus, direction. And this energy, when not dissipated by easy pleasure, begins to shape the reality around you. The silence of the desexualized man is the silence of one who is building, who is winning, who no longer needs to prove anything. He does not speak, he acts. He does not seek, he manifests. Finally, this silence is a call, a reminder for every man who feels his life is being wasted beneath his own desires. Jung said that what we do not face in our unconscious manifests as destiny, and many are being dragged by a destiny shaped by undominated impulses. But the one who dares to silence, who dares to hold back, who dares to transform, the one writes his own path. And that path is not noisy. It is deep, dense, and full of a power only silence knows. We live in an era where pleasure no longer comes from direct experience, but from the reflection of pleasure, from the image, the simulation, the fantasy. Pornography, likes, filters, and social validation games have replaced living with spectacle. The modern man no longer needs to touch, feel, or conquer. It is enough to see, imagine, and mentally masturbate before digital shadows. It is the dependency on the mirror, on illusion. He is addicted not to the act, but to the projection of the act. An empty, recycled pleasure that never satisfies him. It only keeps him hungry enough to remain trapped. This reflex addiction is more insidious than any drug, because it does not destroy the body immediately, but corrodes the soul in silence. Each instant stimulus, each click, each scene, each screen swipe, distances the man from his raw power and plunges him into a simulated existence. He begins to confuse desire with fantasy, connection with projection, presence with distraction. The mind is hijacked by images that promise everything but deliver nothing. And the more he consumes, the more powerless he becomes. Powerless not in the sexual sense, but existential. Unable to act, to truly desire, to face life with intensity. Carl Jung would warn us, the man who feeds on reflections is moving away from his shadow and becoming an empty shell. Because this type of pleasure does not integrate the unconscious, does not confront impulses, it only dissociates them. Instead of maturing his sexuality, he fragments it. Instead of incorporating his libidinal energy, he spills it in constant leaks. This creates a cycle of self-alienation. The more reflex pleasure is consumed, the less contact there is with one's own essence. The man becomes a digital zombie, alive outside and dead inside. The new dependency is as silent as it is destructive. It does not scream, does not bleed, does not break, but it dries out. It extinguishes the sparkle in the eyes, weakens presence, diminishes magnetism. Men addicted to reflection do not inspire respect. They inspire pity. They have no posture, no voice, no direction. They are always in search of stimuli, always dissatisfied, always tired, because they are trying to fill a void with images. But images do not nourish. Images enslave. Desexualizing the mind is, in part, breaking this reflex addiction. It is choosing the real instead of the virtual, silence instead of noise, depth instead of surface. It is not about rejecting sexuality, but reintegrating it as vital force, not as compulsive distraction. The modern man's mind needs to stop masturbating with ghosts and start fighting his demons. Only then does he reconnect with instinct, with the shadow, with the inner fire, and transform the reflex addiction into a new pact with his sovereignty. Solitude is a brutal test, a mirror that does not lie. While the world flees it like a plague, the man who seeks his true power faces it like a severe master. Most see isolation as punishment, but in truth, it is in the silence of emptiness that the noises of the ego disappear and the soul begins to speak. The weak, when seeing themselves alone, beg for distractions, addictions, and external validation. They do everything to escape themselves, but the strong remain. They endure the pain of facing their shadows. And it is there, in the labyrinth of the self, that they find the lost fragments of their identity. The modern world is saturated with empty connections, likes, instant messages, unknown faces on bright screens. We have never been so surrounded and so disconnected. The strong man knows that being alone is not being lonely. He understands that true company is born from within. Each second of solitude is an opportunity to listen to the whispers of intuition, refine his worldview, and strengthen his mind against external storms. Solitude then becomes a psychic training ground, a space where he sharpens his will like a blade, away from the chaos of the masses. Carl Jung said that he who looks outside dreams, but he who looks inside awakens. And the path to this awakening begins with the silence of solitude. The man who withdraws from the noise of the world and dives into himself finds a truth that frightens. He is at once his prison and his key. By confronting this paradox, he begins to transcend the social conditioning that limited him his whole life. He no longer depends on approval. He is no longer afraid to be alone, because he learned that it is in the absence of the other that the true self emerges. Solitude purifies, breaks dependencies, dissolves illusions, and builds a rare kind of presence, a dense, magnetic, unshakable presence. The man who has passed through this inner fire and survived carries something in his gaze that others recognize immediately. He saw the bottom of the well and did not lose himself. He learned to live with himself, which makes him much more dangerous than any man living surrounded by applause, flatterers, and distractions. His energy does not beg for attention. It commands respect. He is the wolf who does not need the pack because he knows how to hunt alone. But this is exactly what frightens the world. A man who does not need. A man who does not beg for affection, company, or recognition. A man who learned to turn solitude into an internal fortress. He is unpredictable, uncontrollable, free. While the weak crumble without external stimuli, he becomes more and more stable, calm, centered, because he discovered the secret that few have the courage to face. Power is born in the desert, and it is in this desert, where everything seems dead, that he finds the birth of the true self, indestructible, autonomous, and finally sovereign. True freedom does not begin in the outside world, but in the silent mastery of your own internal world. Emotional autonomy is not just a skill. It is an invisible fortress, built brick by brick each time you refuse to react impulsively, each time you turn desire into discipline, each time you choose to maintain control when chaos tries to possess you. The man who governs his emotions governs his life. The one who bows before them becomes a slave to anyone who knows how to manipulate him. And the most tragic part? He does not even realize it. The modern world does not want you to be emotionally autonomous. On the contrary, it feeds on your instability. Advertising, algorithms, seduction games, sexual appeals all operate as sensors that detect your emotional weaknesses and exploit each one as weapons against you. When you are emotionally reactive, you are easily predictable. And if you are predictable, you are controllable. Freedom then begins when you become an enigma, when no one knows exactly what affects you, because you have stopped being affected. Building this invisible fortress requires silence, observation, and an inner strength few are willing to develop. It is not about eliminating emotion, but integrating it. Carl Jung would call this individuation, the process by which a human becomes whole by facing both his light and his shadow. And the key to emotional autonomy lies exactly there, stopping running from pain, frustration, rejection, and facing them as gateways to transcendence. What you resist persists. What you welcome transforms. The emotionally autonomous man does not need validation. He has already validated himself. He does not chase female approval, digital attention, or immediate dopamine, because he found within himself an inexhaustible source of value. That scares people. That keeps manipulators away. That breaks entire systems built on others' lack. And that is why this type of man is dangerous, because he cannot be bought, seduced, or threatened. Being emotionally autonomous is living in a fortress no one sees, but everyone feels. It is walking through the world without needing applause, without needing to win an argument, without needing to defeat anyone, because you already won the hardest battle, yourself. You become unbreakable, not because the world stopped testing you, but because you stopped reacting like a slave. And when that happens, you finally stop being a plaything of emotions and become the architect of your own destiny. Sexual energy is one of the most primitive, intense, and visceral forces of the human being. It pulses like an underground engine that drives us, often without our awareness. But when this force is misdirected, it becomes a slow poison, a cycle of stimulus and reward that traps us in repetition and emptiness. Transmutation is the art of interrupting the cycle. It is not about denying the impulse, but converting it. It is recognizing the power behind desire and channeling it into something that transcends the body. A mission, an ideal, a work, a self-construction. The energy that once fed immediacy now nourishes the eternal. The man who transmutes his libido does not become cold. On the contrary, he warms the world with an intensity that does not need to be sexualized. His presence is magnetic not from lack but from fullness. Jung spoke of the process of individuation as the integration of opposites. In this context, transmutation is the bridge between instinct and spirit. It is the moment when desire ceases to be an end and becomes fuel. The impulse that once demanded pleasure now demands creation. The same force that dragged the man to the abyss is the one that now throws him to the top of the mountain. This, however, requires discipline. The man who submits to transmutation will need to break with vices, with ease, with cheap stimuli. He will have to endure the initial emptiness, the inner silence, the restlessness of abstinence. But this suffering is not punishment, it is purification. It is the necessary cleansing so that the internal temple can be rebuilt. Each time he says no to the blind impulse, he says yes to something deeper within himself. And this yes accumulates strength, focus, clarity. What was desire becomes direction. Over time, this man discovers a new pleasure, the pleasure of mastering himself. He feels the power that comes from choice, presence, coherence, and this power cannot be bought or faked. It is a direct result of transmutation. The eyes of this man shine not from excitement but from vision. His posture does not seduce by attempt but by inner authority. He does not chase, he attracts. He does not beg, he inspires. Because he became a source, no longer a well. To transmute is to die and be reborn. It is allowing the old I driven by impulses to be buried so that the new I, guided by purpose, can emerge. This is the most difficult alchemy there is, but also the most rewarding. The man who accomplishes this process does not just transform his sexuality, he transforms his story. He no longer lives in reactive mode, but in creative mode. And this is the true victory, when the fire that once burned outward now illuminates inward. In the end, only you remain. Not your family, not your friends, not your teachers, not your books, not philosophies. Only you, naked before eternity, responsible for sculpting your own being with the calloused hands of consciousness. Being the architect of yourself is abandoning hope for external salvation and assuming the divine burden of inner creation. It is stopping asking for permission to exist and starting to silently design every wall, every staircase, every tower of your identity as a sacred temple. While others live in the ruins inherited from their pains and traumas, the architect not only rebuilds, he revolutionizes. The desexualized mind is the fertile soil where this new project flourishes. When a man ceases to be a slave to primary impulses, his vision expands. He stops living as a reactor and becomes the creator. And creating oneself is not a romantic act. It is brutal. It is lonely. It is uncomfortable. It demands that you tear down walls raised by insecure parents, frustrated teachers, and decadent cultures. You must look at the rubble of everything they told you that you were and decide what, in fact, deserves to stay. Reconstruction begins at the exact moment you destroy what keeps you small. Jung said that you do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. The architect is the one who walks through his own shadow with a lantern made of purpose. He explores what was repressed, what was denied, what was avoided, and finds there the noblest materials to build his inner fortress. Repressed anger becomes strength. Hidden pain becomes compassion. Sexual desire, not repressed, but transmuted, becomes creative energy. Instead of fleeing from his own nature, he integrates it. And by doing so, he becomes whole. But this process demands brutal discipline. There is no room for constant distraction, cheap hedonism, easy dopamines. The architect renounces everything that distances him from his work. He understands that every minute spent on trivialities is one less brick in his construction. Every unconscious slip is a crack in his foundation. That is why he guards his thoughts like a night watchman. He protects his energy like someone defending a castle under attack. He lives with a burning purpose that pulls him from comfort and launches him day after day toward the unknown of himself. In the end, the man who desexualizes is not the one who represses, but the one who redirects. Not the one who flees the world, but the one who builds another inside himself. He abandons the role of victim, spectator, servant, and puts on the mantle of the architect. He understands that no one will come to save him. And so, with firm hands and incandescent spirit, he begins to raise the only home where he will never be a slave again, his true identity. The man who desexualizes his mind is not the one who represses desire, but the one who transforms it into direction, dominion, a higher calling. In this process, he discovers that the energy that dragged him outward can be tamed to lead him inward, where true strength dwells. He learns to walk in silence, to nourish himself with his own solitude, to live without needing constant confirmation from others' gaze. He stops being reactive and becomes creative. He is no longer a reflection. He becomes the source. He stops running after pleasure and begins running after himself. Now he builds. Each impulse once wasted becomes fuel. Each distraction that once weakened him is now discarded. He understands that the external world is volatile, but his inner world can be unshakable. This is true masculinity, self-awareness, direction, silence, and presence. The man who transmutes is the architect of his own destiny. And when the world faces him with doubts, he will not need to say anything because his silence now shouts power. Now, listen carefully. If this video spoke to you, it is because you are already awakening to who you really are. Subscribe to the channel. Some think this was the end, but beware, the war is not over. There are still things left unsaid. These 2 videos in front of you are not here by chance. And what if everything you believe about yourself is only a reflection of someone else's gaze? Click now on one of the videos on the side and begin to break this mirror. You will have to risk the click. So what will you choose?